Lovely. Thank you so much, Kirk. It's absolutely wonderful to be here today to celebrate International Women's Day and also to support the Hobart Women's Shelter. I know they do an amazing job for the work that I see them do through my lecture office. I'm really grateful that we can support you today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Tasmanian Aboriginal community as the original, traditional and continuing custodians of the land that we're gathering on today, Lutruwita. And in the spirit of International Women's Day, I pay my deep respects to the women, elders past, present and emerging. I recognise the important role that Aboriginal women play in keeping their culture alive and continuing. And after a particularly hurtful and divisive month in politics, with the unwarranted attacks on Tasmania's gold class anti-discrimination laws and all women in sport, I'd also like to acknowledge that International Women's Day is an inclusive day, one for all cis women and trans women to come together, celebrate and continue to fight for true equality. This is my first International Women's Day as a Member of Parliament, and I really don't want to deliver a speech that sounds like your typical politician speech because that's not my style. So before I dive in, I'm going to try a bit of audience participation. So this could go incredibly horribly wrong, in which case you'll never have me back again, but we're going to give it a go anyway. I'm about to tell you a riddle, and I want you to turn to the person next to you and tell them the first answer that pops into your head. Does that make sense? So sort of pair up and then give it a go. Here we go. Listen up. A father drives his son to a job interview, applying for a position at a large stockbrokers company in the city. Just as they arrive at the company's car park, the son's phone rings. He looks at his father who says, "Go ahead, answer it." The caller is the company's CEO who says, "Good luck, son, I'm sure you'll do great." The son ends the call and looks at his father who is sitting still next to him in the car. How is this possible? I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about it and tell the person next to you the answer. Was his mother. Yes. Wow. Well done, because that is the answer. The CEO was a woman or a mother. Now, I'm incredibly proud of so many of you in this room because this experiment has been done so many times and over again, more often than not, people fail to think of the possibility that the CEO could be a mother or a woman. And I have to admit, when I first heard it too, I didn't think of that possibility. I suppose it's evidence of my own bias and that of community stereotypes. Which leads me to the theme more broadly of International Women's Day this year. It's around breaking the bias and being inclusive. For me, bias is something that I encounter on a daily basis, and I'm constantly considering how I should respond to it. When I say to some audiences, people are often taken aback because it's perception that women of my generation have it significantly better than generations before. Whilst there have been significant advances in women's rights, it is women that are still subjected to both conscious and unconscious bias, and examples of this are becoming more and more common in everyday life. It's something that we should openly talk about and call out. As I share with you some of my real life experiences, I'm sure they'll trigger for you your own examples. By far the best, or worst, depending on how you look at it, example of gender bias comes from my professional life. As a relatively young professional woman, I have skills and experiences which I think are valuable, and so I put myself forward for leadership within my community. I have 2 degrees, postgraduate qualifications, life experiences, and a really strong sense of social justice, which I thought would help me command a certain presence as a leader. What I didn't anticipate, though, was how gendered people's perceptions and responses to me would be. As is often the case in workplaces, when I became Mayor of Luncheon City Council in 2014, I was surrounded by men in senior positions, my general manager and the deputy mayor at the time, for example. As mayor, one of my main tasks was to be the spokesperson for the council and the leader of the community. The Act of Parliament under which my role was created gave me that authority to speak and to be heard. But the reality was very different. I lost count of the number of times I walked into an important meeting with high-level businessmen and senior politicians, with my male general manager or deputy mayor, and was ignored. The conversation or negotiations immediately was between the men in the room, despite the fact that in most instances, the men would ultimately have to come and ask my approval before they agreed to anything. On more than one occasion, I was mistaken for the note-taker, rather than the person there who was supposed to be making decisions, and the assumption that I wasn't a mayor because I wasn't a man. On a number of occasions, I would be called love or darling, rather than my title as Mayor Johnston, even when there are other mayors in the room that had their title given to them. This infuriated me, and it still infuriates me because it still happens. It forces me to be louder and more aggressive than I naturally am, just so I can be heard and my position respected. My favourite visual example that I can give is a fairly recent one from 2020, when I, along with the Premier at that stage, Peter Gutman, and Larry Kessman, stood on the arena floor of the Donut Entertainment Centre and announced that a deal had been struck between the Luncheon City Council and the state government to sell the Donut Entertainment Centre and lock in a Tassie NBL team. Now, at the risk of blowing my own trumpet, and I'd like to acknowledge also we have Alderman Jan Dunsby from Luncheon City Council here today, this would not have been a deal possible if I hadn't convinced the council to sell the Donut Entertainment Centre, something which was not an easy task, as I'm sure Jan can attest to. So at the announcement, you would have expected to see me as mayor sharing the spotlight with the Premier and Larry. In their wisdom, the media spin doctors from the government had decided that it'd make a great visual for the TV news that night if we all walked in holding basketballs. Except they only bought 2 balls. I was told they assumed that I wouldn't want to hold a ball. Why wouldn't I? Now, I know these two men are quite accustomed to playing with their own balls, but I too had a bit of experience myself. But I was left out. And of course, the visuals and the narrative that are on the news and dominate the news and in print and TV over the coming days was that it was a deal that had been struck by 2 men. It saddened me that the role of a woman in this arguably historic deal for Southern Tasmania was forgotten. And I wondered what example, or lack of example, that set for the young girls in my community. Women in leadership also experience bias, stereotyping and discrimination because of their status as a mother, or as Julia Gillard discovered, because they don't have children. I want to say at the outset that women have the right to bodily autonomy and autonomy over their fertility and reproductive choices. As a woman in leadership with children, I'm constantly judged on my mothering ability and also my ability to lead whilst I'm a mother. At my first council meeting as mayor in 2014, the council by majority agreed to a motion that removed my position on committees the mayor had been on for 150 years in some instances as a matter of right, simply because, and they explicitly said this, they were concerned about my ability to juggle my time commitments on these committees with the need to look after my 2 small young children. Nobody consulted me. It was just assumed that I wouldn't be able to manage. In my experience, mothers are pretty damn good at juggling multiple commitments. And the reality was that flexible hours as mayor meant that I could be involved far more in my children's lives than most working parents. And of course, I still get asked the old chestnut when I'm at events or meetings at night or the weekend, who is looking after your children? They come up to me and they look at me and really quite concerned. Who's looking after your children? Where are they? I've never heard a male colleague being asked the same question. Never. My favourite response is, oh, I've left them in the car. It's okay. I crack the window down. I've got a bottle of water. I then love to wait for the look of embarrassment on their face if they realise I was being sarcastic and then actually they just asked me a really sexist question. Then for women in leadership, there is the style conundrum. It's actually a bias that women, not just in leadership positions, face every day. How we look, dress, how much makeup or how little makeup we wear, what shape we are, all seem to be up for public discussion. I'm sure you'll be aware of the experiment the TV host Carl Stefanovic did a few years ago, where he wore the same suit every day for a whole year and nobody noticed. I'm incredibly envious and wish I could do that too. As a female in the public spotlight, it appears it's open slather to comment on how I look. While I get the occasional lovely, genuine compliment, more often than not, the comments range from the sleazy to the downright offensive. Comments at my male colleagues I'm never subjected to. If I dare to go out without makeup on, then I'm told I look sickly or tired and let myself go. It must be wearing me down the job. If I wear corporate clothes, I have to be careful that it's not too sexy, but not too male-like, but still very pretty and feminine. It'd be commented on either way. If I wear jeans and t-shirts, then I'm a bit mumsy and not really taking my job seriously. I've been told I'm too fat, too skinny, that I look like I'm pregnant. And did you know that apparently we recognise men by their facial features, but women by their hair? So it's all about the hair, ladies. If I wear my hair up, so I normally wear it down, if I wear my hair up outside, it's like I'm in disguise. No one sees me. As this kind of criticism goes beyond physical to the way that people describe my behaviour and the gendered language used, it is completely unacceptable. If I'm quietly or softly spoken, I must be weak. If I display emotion, then I must be hormonal. If I speak assertively or with conviction, then I'm being aggressive. If I speak loudly, then I'm being hysterical. When was the last time you heard a man described as hysterical? Now, I've sat through a very fiery 3 days of Parliament this week. I'm sure you've seen the fieriness on the TV news. And I've listened to my male parliamentary colleagues yell and hurl abuse at each other across the chamber floor. But they're described as men arguing, whereas women rant, apparently. On social media, it seems perfectly acceptable to use explicit gendered language to denigrate women. I won't drop the F-bomb here, but I've lost count the number of times keyboard warriors have described violent sexual acts that they believe I ought to be subjected to for voicing an opinion. Or said things like, this girl is out of her depth. Or is the flavour of the male trolls this week, who have been accusing me of betraying my fellow women because I support all women, including trans women, in sport. And whilst it's true to say that my male colleagues cop a fair bit of abuse too, more often than not, the abuse that they cop is focused on the issue they're discussing, not their personality, their person or their gender. And my final example of how gender bias has fed the stereotype that women could not have got to without a man being there, I'll give you these couple of examples. For me, it can vary from the very mild and relatively mild. You must be so lucky to have a supportive husband partner with you to let you do this job, as if I need permission before I leave the house in the morning. The assumption that I must have slept my way into the position that I have. And once you think that might be something a bit sooky about the whispers or the gossip, it's far more blatant than that. I have sat in a meeting as mayor. My ability to be a mayor was under scrutiny, but my complaints about corruption at the council at the time were being ignored. And a very senior government official told me that I needed to suck it up, princess, and stop whining about corruption, and then stated, not suggested, but stated, the only reason I was in the top job was because I had slept my way there, and that was the only reason why Andrew Rookie had endorsed me, because I had put out. Explicitly said that. Now, that is highly offensive to Andrew. He's a man of great integrity. It's highly offensive to me, because it didn't recognise 70 hours of work that I did every week, putting me into campaigning and advocating for the community. There was no recognition of my professional legal qualifications, no recognition that maybe I had just worked my butt off listening to the community and earning their trust in me. Of course, the only way I could have been in a man's job was to have laid back and thought of England. It still makes me so unbelievably wild to think that in this day and age, this is only in 2016, people still believe that that is how women get into positions of power. Yet despite all of this, I'm still here and talking about the issues in my community that I really care about. And there are so many other women who face the same, but still turn up day after day and use their voice for good. Senator Sarah Hanson-Young felt the need to put on the Senate Hanson record last year her frustrations and experience when she said, "Various names are yelled at me across the chamber, inferring and suggesting that there are men that I'm having an apparent relationship with, and I'm often told to change the way that I look or the way I speak. I'm often criticised for not smiling at people enough when I am, in fact, having a very serious political argument." It happens all the time. For too long now, we just sucked it up, played the game, tried to ignore it, or just raged privately about discrimination and stereotypes. But it is getting really tiresome to be dealing with this kind of shit all the time. And I'm so grateful to the strong women like Grace Kane, Brittany Higgins, and my wonderful sister who's with me today, Rachel Wilson as well, who said so much publicly and said enough is enough. Strong women who have told their stories and put a public face to the experiences of women right around the country. So it breaks my heart when I see that people, often white, privileged males, try and use the same tactics they complain of to tear them down. The backgrounding, the character assassinations, the gendered language to describe their behaviour as hysterical or moody rather than as assertive or powerful. The unflattering photos they try to portray them in as weak or emotional. These women and others have stuck their necks on the line, and it's time that we not only deal with the issues that they've been facing, the disturbing prevalence of sexual violence and harassment in our society, but it's also time that we recognise the way they've been treated in calling it out. It is time to have a robust conversation about the bias and stereotypes that have allowed this culture of inequality and abuse to flourish. It is time for each and every one of us to stop and check our own bias, to think about how we have and can continue to respond to women calling out these issues, to think about the language we use when we talk about them in social settings, to think about the judgments we make in our heads about women in leadership positions, to have open conversations with our children about bias and stereotypes. It's a challenge for us all, women and men. And I want to conclude today by not only applauding the amazing women in my life and the amazing strong women role models we speak at every day, but I also want to applaud the men who recognise that equality is not just something that women should strive for, it's something we can all achieve together, both men and women. And for me personally, I want to acknowledge the men who stand by me today and support me in the work that I do. I don't have to seek their permission to do that. They can stand with me to do it. And I encourage others to be authentically themselves. So I'd like to acknowledge them, and then I brought along today in the room because there's only very few of them in the room. I think they're the only ones that are here. Yes, I think they are. So I'm going to acknowledge them today. So my wonderful staff member, Duncan over here, who's on the camera and always on the camera for me. To our wonderful intern, Finlay, who works in my office as well, and Peter, my advisor, who would normally be here but can't. My amazing brother-in-law, who's been such a fantastic support to my sister Rachel Kevin, thank you so much. And my wonderful partner, Callum, as well, who's here today supporting me as well. Thank you to the men here. I hope that when we go home tonight, or go out in our communities and to social gatherings, we talk to men about this issue. It's something that we should do together. This is not a women's issue, this is a humanity issue, and it takes all of us to be part of it. So after that very long-winded speech, it's just left me to wish you a very happy International Women's Day and ask you to dig incredibly deep to support the Hobart Women's Shelter. As I said at the start, they do such an amazing work in our local community. When we have so many Tasmanians facing homelessness or housing stress, we have so many women, particularly women I've said come through my lecture office, who are dealing with issues of domestic violence. The services that people like the Hobart Women's Shelter provide really are life-saving. So please dig incredibly deep. There's some wonderful silent auction items here, raffles and things like that. But always, if you're thinking of doing any kind of fundraising, please give the Hobart Women's Shelter a thought too. So happy International Women's Day, everyone. Please enjoy your evening, your afternoon, in fact, and evening. I'm sure we'll go into your evening as well. And thank you so much for having me. Happy International Women's Day.